Hello, everyone, and welcome to the paddock. My name is Henrik.
And my name is Sierra, and we will be going over the last two races and news for the 2024 F1 season. It's over.
It's over, it's in the books,
It was good. It was
Yeah.
very good. A very
Yeah.
good season.
and the Abu Dhabi, the final few laps were quite emotional.
For a lot of people.
Mhm.
Of course, for some, they didn't get the last lap.
Especially for someone like me, it was very emotional.
Yeah, we will talk about it. So, how did you like the last two races?
Qatar was so-so, but
Qatar had its issues.
yeah, we spoke about this in the F2 episode, so listen to that if you want to know more.
So, quickly going over some of the things that happened in Qatar, the FIA leaving a mirror that aborted from Alex Albon's car because the Williams is like, even the car is being like, we're done. I'm not doing anymore.
Speaking of the FIA, they apparently want more power.
I refuse. I'm not going to say anything on that note.
Well, the FIA president wants the F1 drivers to get media training.
If Seb was still on the grid, so many things would be different. He does know that if the drivers refuse to drive, he doesn't have a job, right? Right?
The FIA president?
I understand he covers a lot of the motorsports.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
F1 is their main thing, and if he is going to attack the drivers, which the drivers have spoken out. There have been many posts that they have made.
yes, and there was this whole debate on Twitter about it. So the drivers apparently haven't won yet.
I'm gonna say this: as much as Michael Massey made a horrible decision in 2021, I would
This is
take him.
worse.
I would take him back.
This is a whole lot worse than what Michael Massey did in 2021.
During the F1 ceremony on the live stream on the YouTube live stream that they had, when the president came on, everyone was booing him.
And of course, the FIA released a statement a few days later saying that he wanted a rule change in which the FIA wasn't liable if the drivers used foul language.
I understand in press conferences not have, because there are people who do watch, that are kids who do watch it. I understand them not asking them to maybe watch what they say. I get that. But one, it's context that you need to take into what they're saying. Two, if you're going to show it or show the clips, even if it's bleeped out, if you're going to show those on your YouTube videos, and I understand it's F1 that does that, but you can't say that and then do other things. Also, the drivers are people, and they are media trained.
And of course, it's a very high pressure situation with sprints, qualifying, practice. So if they cuss, it's warranted.
It's in the moment. Like, it's every sport. Like, look at the NBA. Look at I'm using American sports, but the NBA.
Look at Formula E.
Formula E, NFL, soccer, or football. There is no sport out there in the heat of the moment where people do not curse.
Drivers and athletes will curse.
You can't control that.
No. And if he, as president, wants to do that, then he loses the drivers.
Even the lower, oh God, what am I trying to say?
Feeder series?
Thank you. They absolutely curse. Maybe not.
They are more so than the F1 things, I believe, but
probably. I mean, maybe not so much F1 Academy. I don't think the girls curse very much. If it's tensions are high, adrenaline is running, you just say what comes to mind, and you can't. It doesn't matter.
Does not matter. It will not matter. It should not matter.
This kind of, I guess we'll continue going into the topic of then going into the end of the Qatar weekend into the beginning of the Abu Dhabi weekend, where it was Max v. George. Ooh.
They had a bashing.
A word bashing.
Explain, please.
How it all started was in qualifying for the main race in Qatar, Max took pole, which then went to the stewards because it showed that Max was blocking or holding up George. They were both on build laps. George was not on a push lap, he was on a build lap. And if you watch both Max and George's onboards during that, Max is told about George, but he also has two other drivers, I believe. It's one is Fernando, and I forgot who the other driver is. That he has, so he let two other drivers through before George came up. George is told on his radio about Verstappen, and you can see him still going. He's again, it's a build-up lap, so he's not going at full speed, but he's still going pretty fast. If you look at it, he does go more towards Max, and Max is to the side. So it's like, George, you knew about this. But so after that, it's taken to the stewards, and Max is given a one-place grid drop, making George pole, Max second.
Which, okay, the one place grid penalty is quite strange, but it is what it is.
It was BS.
Commentary
So,
even said it, that it was
yeah,
very strange
a lot of
and
people have
very, yeah.
said it's BS. Get to the end of the Qatar race, George doesn't keep pole, Max wins the race, George finishes fourth. During the press conference, they asked Max about what happened in the stewards. Max goes, I don't like George. Basically, he's two-faced. He's never seen somebody press so hard for a penalty. That's how Qatar ended. Go into Abu Dhabi. George responds by going in deep. And by
Yes.
deep, I mean he's saying that Max has been a bully. He says that he was going to shove his head through a wall, that he was going to crash into him, that if Abu Dhabi 2021 was reversed, Michael Massey would probably be dead. So he went in, right? And we have Max then going, he's taking things out of context. I never said things like that. This just shows exactly what I'm saying. George didn't like that. Max apparently called him Two-Face, even though I think this shows a lot. It was just a mess
Yeah.
between the two of them. And a lot of people had opinions. My opinion is, I personally, after seeing everything like this, and it didn't help that in Qatar, before all this happened, George had an interview with, I think it was Sky, and he mentioned how they were asking about his relationship with Lewis and like driving with him since Lewis is leaving and at the end of that in two races. And George goes, "Well, I beat him twice." Didn't give any context to, especially around 2021 or 2022, didn't give any context about even the mental state of like why they did,
Which in
why he
itself is
beat Lewis.
strange. So
Well, he just wants to hype himself up. So it was a little weird, but then for him to come back and be like, so for him to have that interview and say it like he beat Lewis on full merit. Whereas if you look at the 2022 season, the car wasn't good. Lewis had just come off of a very emotional and very emotionally taxing 2021 season, especially in
yes.
the last race. And you had Lewis doing a lot more experimental builds in that car than George did.
And yeah, the car was struggling with porpoising for most of that season.
So for him to come back into the points that he made against Max and bring up Lewis and all that gave me a bad taste in my mouth. And I was like, no. And I've never been the biggest fan of George. Like, he's a good driver and things, but I've never been
Mm.
like a fan. And he does, in my opinion, he does give off he is one way on camera and another way behind the camera. And with Matt, especially if you're like comparing Max and him, Max to me, at least from what we've seen, and you do see Max on like, you can see it on Twitch too, which is why it's a little easier for me to, I guess, make this comparison. What you see with Max is what you get, but I also don't see Max being that aggressive of saying he's going to shove his head through a wall. I mean, if you do look at the start of the Qatar race, Max is angled his car, but I don't think Max would ever purposefully run into George.
No.
Max was definitely in the mindset of I'm getting pole no matter what right now, but I don't think Max would definitely have going to cause an accident. But George, because he would just push, and he would make it so George had to give back out.
And of course, we know that Verstappen can be and probably will be very passive aggressive.
Yeah. Also, nobody else looking at then the outside when they get other drivers' opinions. You have Lando laughing it off, being like, I hope they don't make up. I just don't get the hill that George decided to go on with this whole thing. Like, I get your character was attacked and you don't like that, but for him to go as deep as he did,
It's,
it left a sour taste in my mouth for George.
it sounds like more of a George problem than a Max problem, to be honest.
He made it bigger than it needed to be. Just say, look, like Max talked about kind of what happened in the steward's office. Like he went in and explained like we were both on push laps, we were both on build laps. This happened. Like for George to come back and say he didn't even say anything, and Max was already cursing at the steward. Max gave points of what he talked of what was said in the steward's room, whereas George didn't. And in my opinion, in my experience, when you have somebody who, if you, in that type of situation where you have two parties and one party member can actually give not full details of what happened, but can give details of what happened, and the other one doesn't about what was stated and just says about what happened, one looks more credible than the other.
And it's of course the one that can give the full statement.
Again, we're never going to know exactly what happened in there, and hopefully the off season can give them time to cool. But if this is George's leadership now that Lewis is gone and this is how he's going to I will say I really hope Antonelli humbles him.
Yeah, I hope so too. I haven't really been the biggest fan of the Mercedes structure as a whole, so I hope he changes that dynamic.
But it also looks like I've seen pictures. Max has definitely talked and looked close to Antonelli. Not saying that they're buddy buddies, but from pictures I've seen, I think Max knows what Antonelli can do, and that scares George. Not saying George can't compete with it, but I think this does put a lot of pressure on George, and he's trying to figure out how to go about that. And for him to go about that, he's going to attack / go after the biggest person on the grid, and the biggest person on the grid is Max.
So, yeah, what did they say? Don't shit where you eat or something.
Put your money where your mouth is. And right now, George is not. He's talking a bigger game than he can produce.
Absolutely, and yeah, we all know what he is capable of, and he hasn't really shown that he is capable of doing a lot of things.
The car has been a little out there. Like, you can't fully blame it on George. But when the car has been there, yes, the qualifying is great.
And yes, he got the surprise win in Austria. He got the win in Spa, which was overturned. So yeah.
Because the car. He won Vegas. That's more on, again, I believe what Lewis said, and said in the fact that he said if he qualified better, he probably could have won that race, and I do believe that. But yeah, it was just, the best part is you have the drivers then, because Liam went on the Red One podcast, I believe it was. Red Flag podcast. And he confirmed, like, yeah, he's like, I was one of the first people to get there with Yuki, and as people were filling in, we saw that Max had seats next to him, and we were all like, fill the other side of the table, fill the other side of the table, and you have George come in last, and he's like, he just picked up the seat and walked to the other side, like, because Max is just like, come here, buddy, I got a spot, and George is just like, no, like, that tells you what you need to know.
That tells you, yeah, what you need to know and more.
The best part is then you have the next day, and congratulations to Max and Kelly, but you have the next day them announcing that they're expecting a kid. Like, Max doesn't care. Like, Max is like, I'm gonna say what I say, and that's it. And then George continues to go out, and Max is just like, no, this is not what's happening. Like, stop. And then and the next day he just announces, like, that's why I'm like, I see Max's side more than I see George's side.
Well, of course, he has been on the grid for a couple of seasons more, so he has that going for him.
I mean, the fact that George just went in and saying, like, he could get away with murder or something like that, or I don't think it was fully that, but, like, something along those lines, and I'm like, dude, he is not his dad. Please shut up. Like, that's all I was thinking at that point. I was like, please actually shut up. Like, I can't.
And, yeah, of course, we all know what the drivers are capable of producing and what they are capable of saying.
Exactly.
And we have the Nicole Piastri interview on the Red Flags podcast, which was priceless.
So let's go to actual racing topics now. We did the off topics in my.
Let's get into the meat.
Let's get into the meat and potatoes. So Qatar, we were going in. It was seeming to be a kind of a, whereas Vegas was Ferrari could maybe take P1 in the constructors, to this race where it's McLaren should be able to wrap up the constructors. Neither happened.
It was
Ferrari actually,
McLaren territory though, so
it was McLaren territory, so the fact that Ferrari closed it down to 21 points was impressive. Of course, you did have the return of the stop and go 10 seconds for Lando because he sped in a double yellows, and in my opinion, it's double yellows. Yes.
he sped in the pit lane too, right?
No, that was Lewis.
Okay.
And Lewis got a drive through. We saw two penalties return that we haven't seen in a very long time, which is this 10-second stop and go for Lando for speeding under double yellows. Yes, it was justified because for safety, you just can't do it. And for people saying like Max is a snitch, well, Max knew deltas and anybody else would have done it. Fair game. That's how Lewis got it for the drive-through with the speeding in the pit lane, because Lando mentioned something. So all fair in love and war. So it did make it interesting for going into that last race because you had 44 points left on the table. You had
Qatar was a sprint weekend, mind you.
I mean, of course, you did have the McLaren taking 1-2 in the sprint. I will say also in the sprint, you did have a preview for Charles v. Lewis, which was very good to very fun to watch. So going into Abu Dhabi, it was 21 points between Ferrari and McLaren. You had 44 points left on the table, and in terms of the driver standings, you had 8 points between Charles and Lewis, or not Lewis, Charles and Lando for P2. So then we go into Abu Dhabi, and Charles is hit with a 10th place grid penalty.
For exceeding battery allocations.
Because if we all remember, he had to get a new battery after the first race.
Yes. He got new batteries.
Can we just talk about how he replaced the battery at the beginning of the season and had to replace it at the end of the season? Dude went from race 2 to race 23 on the same battery.
Yeah, that's quite a fun coincidence.
So it was already an uphill battle. It was even more of a battle for P6 between Haas and Alpine. Of course, neither Ocon or Hulkenberg scored points for their respective teams in Qatar, but Gasly finished in 5th and Magnussen finished in 9th in that race. So it was still up for grabs for P6 in the constructors. But then it was also announced at the beginning of the very end of Qatar, beginning of the Abu Dhabi week, that Ocon would be dropped from Alpine.
Yeah, he would be released.
And Alpine's reasoning being so he can drive for Haas
in the post-season testing
was kind of BS in my opinion, because they could have absolutely just let him do it, because you had Ferrari doing that with Carlos for Williams. You had Haas doing that with Hulkenberg for Sauber.
Yes.
Like, it was a PR-friendly explanation.
It was a very PR-friendly way of saying you're fired.
Yes. I will say, he didn't even cause the crash. It was Hulkenberg on hards trying something different in Qatar, and he just ended up hitting Colapinto and Ocon. Like, it wasn't his fault. But so I feel that he didn't get to race in his last race with Alpine, but he's probably happy to. He was also probably happy to just be done with the management team in Alpine.
The Alpine management team is quite chaotic.
Going into the actual race, then first lap was chaotic to say the least. You had Max punting Oscar in a risky turn 1 overtake. Of course, that helped Sainz get back into P2 because he did not have the greatest start. But I think if you're looking at that lap one, the 3 things that stand out to me are, again, 1, Max and Oscar. You have Perez and Bottas, which caused Perez to DNF. And then you have, just in the back, chilling at P19, Charles getting up to overtaking 11 cars to get up to P8 And it was like, do Ferrari actually have a shot at winning this? Because you went into the race and you see Charles down in P19, you see Carlos in P3, and the McLaren's 1-2. It's like, well, this is over. And then you get to the end of lap 1, it's like, oh crap, is it possible?
And no, it was not over.
As Charles said at the end of the race, and you know, even though he's like he does want to win a drivers championship. And this is why I'm like people who's like Charles doesn't like and Carlos aren't actually friends, yada yada. The fact that he in his radio message said that he not only wanted to do it for the team but for Carlos. Like they were teammates for 4 years and they meant a lot to each other both on track and off track. And I think you can't look at all on-track boards and races and say that's the character that you see. Like, especially after
No.
Mexico.
Well, Mexico was a different story entirely.
But I'm saying, like, in terms of, like, they're not friends. Because a lot of people came out after Mexico and was like, they aren't friends because Carlos or Charles brushed him off or whatever. It's like, no, that is a 5-second interaction. The way the TV sees it, all this other stuff. This showed just how much they were close and how they valued each other. Like, looking, it was not saying it's the same level as Lewis and Mercedes because they also ended their time together with this race, but the emotion level was still the same.
Well, the emotional factor was sky high. Of course, we have the Haas duo going their separate ways, and we had the Colapinto's
So
time with Williams ending.
Colapinto got me crying before the race even started with his radio message. Like I was like, boy, we aren't even starting the race yet, and you are going to make me cry. Just him thanking everyone. I was just like, my heart. I'm like, this is already going to be emotional. Do not start now.
Yeah, but the final 10 laps was kind of my epiphany of, wow, this is ending now.
So the drivers who will not be on the grid next year will be Joe Bottas, who did get announced as Mercedes reserve driver. So his what next came true. We do know what that's going to be. Colapinto, Magnussen, they will all not be on the grid.
Magnussen will drive either WAC or IMSA for next season.
Joe may or may not be the reserve driver for Ferrari. We still don't know anything on that. Colapinto, I assume, is the reserve driver for Williams next year. And then we have Perez.
The black sheep.
These two last races.
And of
Oh,
course, we had the Tuesday before we recorded this.
it was announced. So the last things were announced. You had Liam is now going to be Max's teammate. You have Perez being booted from Red Bull, and you have Hadjar joining the grid with Yuki as his teammate for VCarb. Again, they are not called VCarb anymore, but that is what I'm calling them for right now because it's not 2025 yet.
In my mind, there'll always be VCarb. So, did you read the statement from Laurent Paquis?
No.
Well, it was basically just thanking Liam for his time with VCarb and just
Okay.
acknowledging what he has meant to the team and things like that.
Well, that's good. I'm happy they value him.
Yeah, so it was very nice to read and still, of course, emotional, taking into account that we all probably know that if it wasn't for the Honda deal, Tsunoda would have gotten the seat.
I don't think Horner values Tsunoda, even though he says it was close. Tsunoda's been with the team, been driving for a Red Bull team for 4 seasons now, I think.
Yep, since 2021.
And he, especially this season, he showed that he was ready for it, and they went with Liam. Now, there could be other factors. Maybe Yuki's driving style is closer to Perez's driving style, and they did want, and Horner did say that Liam, as it's not the same as Max, it's closer to Max's driving style, so maybe they want, because it's always going to be Max's team.
Well, until he leaves.
Until he leaves. So,
in other news, Zandvoort was extended and then sacked.
They go till 2026, but if that's what they're going on, and maybe they're saying like Yuki isn't as adaptable to that type of style, then I could see it, because especially because Red Bull finished 3rd this year in the constructors. And if they do want to if they want to be able to build the car and they want to have it be more equal to both drivers, having somebody who is closer to Max's driving style does make sense in that point. I'm not saying that they should have picked Liam over Yuki or Yuki over Liam. I think Yuki deserved it more than Liam just because Yuki has shown throughout this whole season how good he can be.
Yes.
But if you're going it because Horner did say it was very close. So if it is down to the driving style, I can understand that. Am I happy with it? No, because I think Yuki again deserves a chance in the actual Red Bull seat, but it makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense considering, like you said, his Lawson's driving style and everything around that. I've said it before and will say it again. Red Bull is in the process of self-destructing in many ways. And
It'll be
if you
interesting.
have watched F1 for any amount of time for the past 3 seasons, you know what I'm talking about.
It will be interesting to see, especially because it looks like McLaren will be the car to beat next year. But it's also stated an interview came out, and Ferrari has stated that basically 99% of the car will be changed going into next year, which it's 50-50 on how I feel about that.
So the question is, with Ferrari, Hamilton, and Red Bull and Lawson, will they self-destruct?
I will hold my. I don't know. It's hard to say. I think Red Bull has a. It's hard to say because Red Bull has Max, and Max is very good.
Well,
Rephrase: Max is one of the best drivers on the grid right now,
yes.
and he will get the best out of that car. But from what we know, Red Bull's wind tunnel is not at its best, is how I'll say it.
No, it's not and will never be, probably.
Well, they're redoing it. I'm pretty sure is like with Ford coming in, they're getting it redone. So it's out of season is how I'll say that. With Ferrari, Ferrari's always difficult, right?
Yes. Right. I think Ferrari could self-destruct from within.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I'll say it this way because in an interview, that same interview with Fred, where he said like the car is like being changed again, it was also stated that Charles knew from day one that Lewis was going to come into Ferrari. So they have talked this whole season about it. I also see it. I've been consistent with saying this. I think for Lewis, it's two goals in mind. One is to win eight drivers title, and one is to win the constructors. I think next year, because it is still the same regulations, it's still
Same-ish.
no, we're still in the same regulations. 2026 is when the new regs come. So we're still in the same regulations.
There are
Lewis
some
is
minor changes, but still.
not enough for it to make a difference. Like it's not a whole new car or whatever like that. So
Sure.
it's the same cars we've been dealing with. Charles has come off of one of his best seasons since 2022. Yeah, I would say this is
2022 was a very up and down season for him.
I would
Yeah.
even state that this is better than his 2022 season.
Yeah, on paper, but maybe not in practice.
Besides that middle part, so Canada to Spa, even though he did get the podium in Spa, he won Monza. That's why I'm like from Canada to Belgium.
Yeah, but Monza was a stroke of pure luck, I would say.
But you need that in F1 sometimes.
Yeah, but nothing was set in stone for him. He didn't take pole in Monza or anything.
But the Ferrari was better on its tires. Like
Absolutely, but still, he had, yeah, it wasn't relative luck with the pit stop strategy, which isn't Ferrari's strong suit.
I mean, he pitted after Lando, which he should have then. How it went, he should have technically done a two stop, and he was good enough to do a one stop. Whereas Oscar couldn't do a one stop, thus he had to do a two stop, and then it just all went. I will say from in my opinion, from Canada to Belgium, even though Belgium he did get a podium, I will say from Canada to Belgium, it was his down year, which is why I will say 2022 was a better season. This season for Charles was a better season than 2022. Even though 2022 he was second in the standings and he was at one point leading the drivers championship. So going into 2025, Charles does have the upper hand because again, this is a whole new team, whole new dynamic for Lewis. Not saying Lewis can't overcome that.
No.
But I think going into next season, as much as he wants to win, I think Lewis might go in with the mindset of just trying to win the constructors with Ferrari. Not saying he does not want to win the if the Ferrari gives him the car and he can get around it and around all that, that he will not try to win the drivers. I'm not saying that.
Mm.
I am saying with everything that's happening, and even with how not Carlos, Charles is performing, especially after the last race, I think that puts a lot of, as much as Lando won the race, the fact that Charles went from P19 to P3 in that race, he will be going into next season. I see him as one of the favorites to win next season. I think Lewis, as much as he wants and will do everything in his power to be up there to win, I really do think that it will be more Charles going for the Drivers' Championship than Lewis, in my opinion.
Okay, that raises one more question. Here, Hamilton's contract is up in 2027. When 2027 comes around and he hasn't won the drivers or constructors with Ferrari, will he retire?
Probably. I don't think he'll extend. Especially because if Behrman is as good as he is, if they have Bogdanovich, say Bogdanovich wins in F2 next year,
2025?
I don't see Lewis being Alonso.
No, he doesn't have the prowess, for lack of a better word.
I wouldn't say prowess. I think he wants to do other things. But I think also this is something on Lewis's bucket list, like to drive for Ferrari. But also I think in 2026 it's a better shot for Lewis to have a better chance at winning the drivers' championship because it is completely new regulations. It's all more equal footing for each driver, whereas he's going into a car that Charles has fully helped develop. And I will say this, I think if you're looking at history, because I did look at this, the last time McLaren won the constructors, so back in 1998, the next six were won by Ferrari.
Yeah, so up until 2005? Yeah.
Yes. But also, if we're going like weird hijinksy, like superstition type of deal, McLaren won the constructors with 666 points. I'm not saying it's a bad omen.
Could be.
But if you're looking at Lando and Oscar, if you're gonna ask me between Ferrari and Lewis, Ferrari with Charles and Lewis versus, and then looking at McLaren with Oscar and Lando, I think you have more likelihood of Lando and Oscar having a meltdown in McLaren before you have Ferrari with Lewis and Charles. Because as much as if you're looking at primes, like in terms of ages and everything, I'm not saying Lewis is past his prime, but he is up there and not in his prime anymore. He's still very good. He's still very consistent. But if you were looking at it, I would not say he's still in his prime.
No, he is kind
Whereas
of falling down from that.
Charles is in his prime. So that's where I think the difference lies there.
Verstappen is in his prime.
Yes. If you look
Uh,
at the McLaren drivers, both of them are entering their prime.
Of course, you have the constructors title. That wouldn't have been possible if they weren't entering their prime, as you said. You have Norris almost winning the drivers' championship, also not possible if the team hadn't entered their prime.
So I will say that if you were asking me which of the top four teams would have a meltdown first, I would put McLaren in there.
Okay, so McLaren, in my case, it would probably be McLaren, Red Bull, and then Mercedes, and then Ferrari.
I would put it as McLaren, Merc, Red Bull. I would go McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull. And that's just because I think Liam knows that Max is the number one driver and Red Bull will treat it like that. Like Red Bull doesn't do two number one drivers. I think with the Mercedes issue, it's going to be Russell v Antonelli, and I think Antonelli might, as much as like everybody's like Antonelli's too young, I still think Antonelli will show give him a couple races and he'll show exactly how good he is or how bad he is, and and George won't be able to compete with that.
Well, a fun twist for next season is that Melbourne is the season opener, so we'll see how that plays out.
And we'll have two Australians with Doohan and Oscar. But I think that concludes F1. I know we aren't talking about Perez, but I really don't know what else to say about Perez.
Well, that conversation is done and dusted, more or less.
Like he's no longer in the seat. It happened. It should have happened a lot earlier, in my opinion. But
well, it should have happened at the tail end of last season, in my opinion. But
he shouldn't have got. Yeah, And people saying, well, why then you get a vanilla contract extension? Horner expressed it as, we did it to try and build his confidence and make sure that it for him it was there's no pressure, you're good, you have the seat, and it didn't work.
And of course, you are referring to the 2026 extension, whereas for the 2024 extension, he got it as a reward for winning Monaco in 2022, which was absolutely warranted. He did very well in 2023 and 2022 altogether, but not this season.
I mean, 2023, you could see the decline. He did pick it up, but they had they still finished first in the constructors. He still finished second in the standings because they had the best car.
So yeah, I would probably say around Vegas was the beginning of the end for him last year.
Well, he dropped off after Baku, so I think it was Miami, and then he had that because he was almost caught by Lewis. Like that's the thing. Like, as much as people are like, he helped, like, I will not take anything away from 2021 when he was very good at like the defense part, and 2022 where he did win races, same with 2023. But if you look at 2023, in the middle of the season, he did have issues. And I think it's just glossed over because he had a very good the Red Bull was the best car.
It was very fluent.
The only race Red Bull didn't win was Singapore.
So he had, was it a 97% win rate?
Something like that. I think it was a 9. No, because Perez won. Probably, yeah, 97, 96.
I think it was 97.8 something win rate. So that goes to show that, yeah, the RB19 was very good, and it also goes to show that Sergio Perez was and still is very highly regarded by the team for obvious reasons.
It was time to go. It was time to go probably after Miami, but they kept him on, and then we'll never know exactly why they kept him on, but we can speculate. But
yeah, and my theory is that they did it so that he could build some confidence again.
The only good race after the first couple was Baku, and Baku he crashed. And then he didn't, like, I understand he crashed, but then he couldn't pick it up. Yes, he got out of Q1s, but that didn't stop anything. But that is it. That is the end. That is what we're done. We are done with Perez. We won't have to talk about it anymore. We're done with the season, even though it was really good. I'm ready for 2025, but the season is done. We are dusted. We are putting it to bed. It was very good, very entertaining. Next year will be something else.
Good night, 2024. Good morning, 2025.
But that will conclude our review / wrap up for the 2024 season. Please like and comment. Look at all our socials, even though we haven't been very active on the socials, but that'll change in 2025. Please enjoy your holidays. Please enjoy the new year, and we will see you all when liveries and the start of the season and other things. Happy off season.